Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's District Administration Web Seminar, which is entitled More Than a Student Information System, Effectively Tracking Students Experiencing Homelessness, which is brought to you by the generous support of our sponsor here today, Transact Communications. Now, before we get started, I'd just like to share just a few housekeeping items with you, and we'll get underway. If at any time during the presentation you need any technical support, please use the chat panel, which you can find on the right side of your screen. Then select on my name, which is Stephen Blackburn, and then just type in your message and I'll get back to you as quickly as I can. If you prefer to listen privately, or maybe you don't have computer speakers, I'm going to be submitting a phone number and access code in the chat that you can dial in to here. So look out for that. We will also be welcoming any questions that you have here today with a Q&A session that will be taking place at the very end of the presentation. You can submit all of your questions by using our Q&A panel, which you can find again at the bottom right-hand side of your screen. Then just send your questions to all panelists and we will answer them at the Q&A. If you currently don't see the chat or the Q&A panels, just look again to the bottom right-hand side of your screen and then click on the expand triangle, which should be located directly in front of the panel name, and you'll have access to it that way. In addition to the Q&A, there will also be points throughout the presentation when our presenters here at Transact, they'll be asking you to share your thoughts to certain questions in the main chat. It will also be a great way for all of you to share some of your solutions that you've been experiencing at your school or district to create a stronger sense of community here. So we'd love to see you take part in that. Also, the last thing I'd like to point out before we get started is that if you would like to access the web seminar here at a later time, you'll be pleased to know that everyone who is registered, as well as everyone who is attending here today, will receive an email with a link to the slides and an archive recording from us at DA at some point tomorrow. And now it is my pleasure to pass things off to our first speaker here today, Joe Can from Transact. Hi, Joe. Great to have you with us here today.
Stephen, glad we're here. Really appreciate the opportunity to share some ideas today. So we'll do a little introductions first before we dive in. I'm Joe Can, founder of Can Systems, one of the divisions of Transact. Almost 25 years ago, I founded Can Systems with the mission of helping people through technology. And I'm pleased to be able to continue to do that through Transact and our various software tools. Let me ask Ben and Lynn to quick introduce themselves, and then we'll dive in.
Everybody, this is Ben Hinkle-Wazalek. I'm the Director of Operations for the Milwaukee office of Transact. I've been working with K-12 programs, primarily in the areas of data collection and reporting for about the last 18 years, and I'm excited to be here with you today.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lynn Russo, and I'm the Senior Account Success Manager for KN Systems as a division of Transact. Along with Ben and Joe, I've worked with our programs for over 17 years and look for many more years to continue. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Ben and Lynn. So a little bit about Transact. Transact was founded 25 years ago to help administrators manage complex requirements for compliance and collaboration on forms, fees, federal reporting, and ultimately parent and student engagement. Transact Communication really wants to be an extension of your district's staff. Our desire is to help school and district staff support at-risk students and their families through a comprehensive system that allows users to easily collect and use the data they need, regardless of program size. The system we'll talk about today in the context of effectively tracking students experiencing homelessness is called HIMSS, short for the Homeless Information Management System for Students. This web-based application is a data management system created for and by homeless program administrators and designed to meet the reporting requirements of the Mckinney-Vento Act. HIMSS is not a student information system. It does collect student data, but does so much more in support of at-risk students. But before we talk specifically about SIS systems and HIMSS, Let's talk about at-risk and homeless students. And for that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Lynn.
Thank you, Joe. So the first question we have is, what is a homeless student? The identification of a student is experiencing homelessness are usually determined by their living situation. As an example, students who lack a fixed, regular, or adequate nighttime residence are considered homeless. Many of the states and districts that we work with are required by the federal government to support families and students who have been identified to ensure that they continue to receive an education by providing related services to them, such as transportation, food, and so on. There are various funding sources that can be associated in supporting these students and families of homelessness. The program one is the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, which is the required Title I reservation to provide these services for the students experiencing this homeless status. State level funding is also designated to address the needs of the students and experiencing homeless, also often available partner contributions that are also made available provide a considerable amount of funding. To determine a homeless student count, a typical district looks at the family income level, the data related to free and reduced lunch, but at which would be found in an SIS system. But there's more needed than just a simple check mark in a student's record that indicates they are homeless. Let's talk about how to identify and support these students experiencing this homeless experience. We're going to turn that back over to Joe.
And I was muted. As we know, students do not readily identify their situation with the teacher or anyone at school. It's not something that people like to share. I'd like to pause a moment from our webinar and ask those on the webinar to put in the chat how you identify students experiencing homelessness. What are some of the ways that you do that in your local district? We'll take just a few minutes to do that. If you could put that in the chat, that would be great.
If you're currently having trouble or difficulty finding the chat, just look to the lower right-hand side of your screen, and there should be an image of a bubble. Click on that, and that should open up the chat for you. Thanks.
Well, a few ideas, a few ways that we know that students might be identified as homeless. Parents can let students let the school know, or there's a change in address to a shelter or a hotel perhaps, more frequent address changes for transportation needs, teacher evaluations, student change in habits, maybe they're arriving early or staying late, same clothes over multiple days, or neighbors could let school districts know. Those are a few ways.
Yeah, Joe, it looks like there's a couple other in the Q&A section as well. Folks are
oops.
doing housing questionnaires, Got students typically sharing their information with the teachers, currently through our OLR during the registration process. So it looks like that's probably an intake form of some kind that is taking place as the students are enrolling in the school district. And then also family partnership advocates that will, upon registration, have a note in their file as needing more services. So mostly it becomes aware when we notice that they're doubling up or address links to a motel or shelter. So some of the same examples that you were giving, but it looks like a lot of folks are doing it sort of during the intake process when a child is registered in the district.
Great, thanks, Ben. For some reason, the Q&A was closed on my screen, but the chat was showing. So yes, excellent. So there are a variety of ways that students can be identified. And so, of course, once they are identified, right, they need to be supported through the efforts of the school district and its partners. Among the many tasks that can help students are letting supportive services such as nutrition and transportation know about the student's needs right away, generating communications to those that need to keep apprised of the student and their situation, including school social workers and district homeless liaisons, managing student referrals, which is essential to see what is needed and what services may be missing, and keeping track of those referrals so people don't fall through the cracks, students and their families. Collecting and retaining important documents for the benefit of students and their continuity of care and education if and when they change schools. And keeping track of district services offered to each student, such as after-school programs, regular meals, etc. While an off-the-shelf SIS cannot do these things, HIMSS was designed to support and facilitate these important tasks. And as HIMSS helps schools and districts to support these students, it is also collecting considerable data. The Federal McKinney-Vento Act, or EDFACS, and its reporting requirements don't require all the data that HIMSS collects, but having such data at your fingertips can be very useful. Data about students and the services they receive can be used to evaluate the effectiveness of efforts to support students experiencing homelessness and their success in the classroom as well. So I'll turn it over now to Ben to talk a little bit about what data is actually required.
Thanks, Joe. As Joe mentioned, I think as Lynn mentioned, McKinney-Vento is the primary source of funding to support students experiencing homelessness. And while very little is required to be reported specifically for McKinney-Vento at the federal level, there is some key data that is required related to the support of homeless students that must be reported. So some examples of that include counts of students by age or grade level, counts of students by type of primary nighttime residence, counts of students based on demographics such as disability status, English learner status, race or ethnicity, foster care status, migrant status, things like that. Additionally, there's some combinations of data like counts of homeless unaccompanied youth by primary nighttime residents, as well as some academic outcomes such as math, reading, and science assessment data. So as Joe was talking about, a lot of this data is already being tracked in a student information system. And a student information system is definitely essential for school district operation. But as we've seen, an SIS alone can sometimes be inadequate for tracking all of the information related to students experiencing homelessness. And that's because an SIS is only accurate as the data that it houses. So in lots of cases, inaccurate or incomplete data when it comes to homeless students can impact future funding. But most importantly, it can also negatively impact the success of the vulnerable student population that you're serving. So the best scenario for at-risk student success when it comes to data management and data management systems is when all of your data management systems and your student information system work together to collect and track what each does best. So ideally, all of your data repositories are going to be kept in sync with your with your district student information system via a real-time connection, or at a minimum, a nightly automated refresh of key information. So having that connection between what your district is collecting in terms of student demographics and day-to-day class participation, things like that, and some of the services that you're providing to students experiencing homelessness is important to collecting valuable data and then reporting on that data as well. So let's talk a little bit about some of the data that you might be collecting or that you might want to collect. So we talked about some of those federal requirements that are typically going to be data elements that you can find in your student information system. But what are some other data elements that you want to collect? And based on our conversations with some of our customers, we've learned that many programs have both formal and informal data reporting requirements for a variety of stakeholders. For example, you might need to report to school board members, other district administrators, community partners, and even the public may want to know how students experiencing homelessness are being served in your district. So things like keeping track of any gift cards that you're providing, gas cards, food cards, things like that. Tracking referrals to outside agencies. That was one of the things Joe mentioned. A lot of times your district might not be able to provide some of the services that your students need. So being able to refer students to outside agencies and then track follow-up on those referrals to see if the students and their families receive the services that they might need. Documenting case notes. Many of you have social workers that are working within your schools and interacting with students on a day-to-day basis, having a place for them to keep track of all of their case notes and just jot down any thing that they're seeing going on in a child's life can be really important. And then also logging communication with parents and guardians can come in really handy to know what sort of messaging, what communication you've been providing to parents. And in some cases, there's required documentation that you have to provide to parents, and being able to document that you did provide key documentation to parents is really important as well for auditing purposes. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the other types of services that you might be providing, and specifically to students experiencing homelessness, and how are you tracking those right now? So if you could take a couple minutes and either in the chat menu or in the Q&A section, just put some comments in about additional data elements that you're currently collecting and what types of reporting you have to do either to your local school district, to your state, or to other agencies that might be interested in what's going on in your program. So I see there's a question in the Q&A section that kind of relates to the previous slide, talking about interconnecting your student information system with some of your other data collection systems. So the question is, does HIMSS communicate with Infinite Campus, and is it compatible with Clever? So we do, for the HIMSS product, we do have integrations available with pretty much all student information systems. There's a certain data specification called the One Roster data spec, which is used to sort of share key student demographic information between student information systems and third-party vendors. So we primarily will interact with that sort of data set, and there's APIs as well as CSV extracts typically available from most student information systems, Infinite Campus being one of the ones that I know has both of those options, both the API and the CSV export option. And we can establish processes then that would import that information on an ongoing basis so that your data available to your homeless liaisons and school social workers, folks like that might be interacting with student information, would have up-to-date records for your students. Okay. While we're waiting for any other comments, it looks like there's one other one, attendance grades and on track for graduation. Great examples there too. Yeah, the graduation rates, that's something that we've seen a lot of as well in terms of reporting. A couple other ones that we've seen, services provided to families, such as housing assistance or substance abuse care. So tracking some of the sort of participation in different types of programming that might be offered through your district or through partner agencies can be really helpful. Tracking of school supplies that are being provided to families. And then also participation in programs like before and after school or Head Start programs to see if there's additional services that can be provided to this vulnerable student population to get them the additional services they need. Okay, another question that came in said this program sounds like it fills a gap between the current system and information data that may need to be reported. Can you explain how compliant it is with the confidentiality pieces required with the protected population? That's a great question. We do have data sharing agreements that are available that we enter into with all of our customers so that information that is shared in the HIM system, you know that it's being kept secure and confidential. And then in some cases, depending on sort of the implementation of HIMS, we can also sort of create a network of districts in a particular county, for example, or even at a state level that can allow some key information related to students to be shared from one district to another. So in certain cases, depending again on the specific data sharing agreements and confidentiality agreements that are in place, we do have the ability to, for example, notify a district when a child transfers in that was previously identified as experiencing homelessness in a different district. So having some of those key indicators, things like the state student identifier of a child, and being able to identify when that child appears in another district can be a really powerful tool to reduce the time between a child enrolling in a district and starting to receive services that they might need. Question of, can we control who can access individual records in the system? Yes. So we can talk about this a little bit more in maybe an individualized demo, but there are a variety of controls in place related to security level and permissions of individual users. So you can set up who is going to have access to the system, what students or what schools they should have access to, and then additionally what level of permission they should have. So usually the permission levels are based on roles within a particular organization. So things like we'll have a liaison role, we'll have a social worker role, things like that to provide the appropriate level of access to each specific user. Okay. I'm not seeing anything else specifically related to particular data elements that are being collected or reported on. So I'm going to turn it over to Lynn to talk a little bit about the impact of data quality on programs and students that you're serving.
Thank you, Ben, for such a great introduction there. One of the things that we hear most often from some districts that are exporting data into a spreadsheet and then uploading it back into another portal or having manual reports method combined with online forms. That can get pretty messy, as you can imagine. We have touched on some of the reasons why data quality might suffer, a mismatch between multiple systems or an obsolete data still may be in the system. What is the impact of poor data management? The programs are spending more time manually entering data and less time with the students. Less effective decision making, not having that full picture of what's going on. In turn, that affects the strategy of how the best to serve students experiencing homelessness. Poor data quality slows productivity. Records have been reviewed often and possibly merged, or as the IT are needed to resolve the issue. Good data management creates less stress, breeds trust. And I remember one of our coordinators that we worked with for many years, she said the best part of what she thinks is that when she's looking for information, she has a single location where to go. She has that information for her state reports as well as her management team as a whole. And she can get all of this in a matter of minutes versus going to look in different locations to find that same data. So you can see we have many benefits of what we can offer as a software management. In this case, I'm going to turn it back over to Ben so he can continue to talk about some of the value that he is bringing in.
Yeah, so regardless of how your district is currently tracking data, we wanted to talk a little bit about some data quality best practices, just things that you could be doing with tracking information and making sure that you have the data that you need to report. So it can really be a struggle to maintain accurate records and generate reports when you're dealing with multiple different stakeholders and multiple different systems. So it's especially compounded if you have data stored in different formats. So you've got some data in your student information system, other data in spreadsheets, maybe you've got some Word documents, maybe you've got paper documents with information about your participants. So a couple of things that we recommend when it comes to tracking data. First, try to enter data frequently. Whenever possible, enter data into whatever system you're using to collect the information as quickly as possible after an event or an interaction with a child or their family. The fresher the information is in your head, the more accurate you're going to be when recording it. Try to eliminate extra steps in tracking data by using a web-based tool. So avoid taking notes on paper if possible that you then have to transcribe into your data collection tool. If you're using a web-based tool, that will allow you to record the information directly from any device that you might have, laptop in some cases, even mobile devices, tablets, smartphones, as long as you've got an internet connection. If you've got an online source where you're keeping track of all that information, you can update that immediately wherever you are. If possible, try to use a single system to collect all of your data. If you can consolidate all of your information into a single tool, that's great. As Lynn mentioned, having multiple tools to collect all of your students' data can make it really difficult, especially if you're trying to merge information together for reports. If in your spreadsheets you just have student names and then notes related to those students, and then in another spreadsheet you have IDs of students, it can be hard to sort of make those connections between your different data sets to get the complete picture of the impact that your program is having on students and their families. And then also think about how you're going to need to report your data. That may impact not only the type of data that you collect, but also the level of detail that you're keeping with those data. For example, ask yourself, will you need to report things like the number of times a student received a service, or do you need to report the number of hours that the student received that service? So that differentiation between sort of dosage, right, number of hours versus specific count of interactions with a child can really impact not only the type of data that you should be collecting, but then also how you're combining that data for reporting purposes. Additionally, do you need to differentiate between the types of contributions that are made by partners? Is there data that you're currently collecting that could be eliminated because nobody's looking at it? So just kind of looking at overall how are you going to need to report the data and then making determinations on what information you should be collecting. So we talked about a couple of these already, but I want to just see if there's any other sort of reports that people are generating right now. So we talked a little bit about graduation rates. A couple other things we've seen, percentages of honor students that are involved in the McKinney-Vento programming, free and reduced lunch rates among students identified as experiencing homelessness compared to the district as a whole, reporting on credits attempted versus earned, and then also things like disciplinary data. So dates, types of disciplinary action, and reasons for that action are all things that we've also seen reported, both on an individual level as well as an aggregated level by school and by district. So any other types of data that you're currently needing to report on, and maybe some things that you're struggling with, and want to see if other folks out there maybe have ideas on how you could potentially be providing different types of information or collecting data in a better way than you currently are. Okay. We'll allow those to keep coming in. I'm going to turn it back over to Joe to talk a little bit more about going beyond your student information system.
Thanks, Ben. Yes, lots and lots of data. As we know, student information systems collect a lot of this data, and they're a powerful and essential tool for every district and every school. And like we were talking about, they can collect some of the things that were mentioned: day school attendance, detailed student information such as demographics, information about households and contact information, behavior issues, grades, test scores, student notes, and more. However, we need to go beyond the SAS to really support these students. And student information systems cannot do many of the important things that we've talked about out of the box. In order to do such things and offer such features, they're going to require some customizations. And customizations sometimes cost money, typically they do, and they take continual modifications as laws and situations such as COVID change. So HIMSS goes beyond the capabilities of an SAS to be a truly supportive software tool for students experiencing homelessness and for their families. Some examples of how HIMSS can help liaisons and social workers do their jobs better include the following. When a student is first identified as experiencing homelessness, barriers they are facing can be recorded in HIMSS so they can be properly addressed. If transportation, clothing, or nutrition issues exist right away when the student is identified, information about that can be emailed immediately to contacts in those specific departments. When there are staff changes, such as a school social worker, in order for students not to fall through the cracks, information about those students is shared with a new social worker. Important documents such as academic records, immunization, or other health records, or proof of residency forms can stick with the student in HIMSS to ensure continued service. HIMSS can easily record services rendered as one-time services or ongoing ones, even recording the number of hours of service received by each child. When a student or family is referred to a partner agency, that referral can be recorded in HIMSS, and a report can be generated to ensure that the referral is followed up in order to confirm that the student or family actually made their appointment. And if not, a follow-up with the student or family can be made. HIMSS can record information about these partners, as Ben mentioned earlier, and their contribution or their commitments to assisting at-risk students and their families. You can therefore share with others, other stakeholders, school board, etc., how your district is utilizing resources beyond its own to make a difference for these kids. And as discussed in detail above, HIMSS can help generate data for state and federal reports. Some closing thoughts. There's a lot to do in any school district and every school to support students in general, and the data that's collected can be overwhelming. As we know, students experiencing homelessness are often the lowest performing academically and most at risk of dropping out, and thus need the most support to ensure their academic success. It is essential that accurate and timely data is available to support these students. HIMSS, ideally working in conjunction with an SAS, is designed to maintain critical data about just these students, not the entire district, so the data challenge can be much less overwhelming to school social workers and district homeless liaisons whose job is to help students succeed and support them, not to deal with loads and loads of data. HIMSS is a powerful tool that goes beyond any out-of-the-box SAS to help school staff properly track identified students to better ensure they have access to the resources they need to be successful in school and in life. Switch slides there, Ben. Thanks. So we want to thank you and really appreciate your time for attending today and hope you feel it was beneficial. To learn more about HIMSS or our other K-12 software tools offered by Transact, please visit our blog at transact.com and consider following Transact on social media. As Stephen mentioned earlier, the recording of this presentation will be shared with all those that registered in the next few days. So we have some time for some Q&A now. If there are other questions or ideas, please put those in the Q&A or the chat.
All right, yeah, perfect. Yeah, thank you, Joe, Ben, and Lynn, for your time with us today. And like Joe just said, We've come to the Q&A portion of our webinar where you can now send your questions into our speakers so you can have your questions answered live on the air. I know some questions are coming in right now, but for those of you who haven't already, you can send in any questions by accessing the Q&A panel, which you can find at the bottom right-hand side of your screen. It's the option next to the chat button, and if you can't see it, there should be 3 dots or an ellipses, like I like to call it, next to the chat button. Then just click on that, and that should bring you to the Q&A panel. Okay, so let's see. A question that just came in from Janet. What is the best way to collect needs assessment information?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm gonna check to see if Lynn has any specific cases here from conversations that she's had with district liaisons, but I know that can be somewhat difficult, and there's typically a lot of sort of trauma, I guess you could say, associated with completing the needs assessment for families. A lot of information that's very private and sensitive that's being collected from participants and their family members. So being able to collect that information and store it in a secure place that makes it easy to sort of move along with the child as they move from school to school or from social worker to social worker can be really helpful. And I'm not sure, Lynn, do you have any thoughts on how programs are currently collecting needs assessment information, or anybody else out there? How are you successfully collecting needs assessment information now?
I have worked with a few of our clients, and that they struggled with that exact question. So they said, you know, how do you gather the information and share it with those that need it without compromising them? So many times what will happen is at the time of registration, a parent may talk to them and say that they're experiencing homelessness and living in perhaps a shelter or a hotel. One of the things that we have witnessed across the last 5 or 10 years is that the administrators will immediately contact the liaison for the district. They pull that confidential information, and then they can store and share just what is available and should be shared with those that should, because through the confidential notes or through the documentation. The other thing that comes up is that a student that's identified as homeless, perhaps the parents don't have all the shot records or the birth records. So the school districts have the opportunity that they can store that in a safe location, and it's secured based off of the security levels that are within the program staff. So if others have additional items, we are excited to hear them from you.
Yeah, I think that kind of ties in with this next question to some extent too. This looks like somebody said that they're a nutrition services director. They work with McKinney-Vento program to get information for our students so we can include them in our identified student percentage and provide them with a free meal. Question was, what tips do you have for our McKinney-Vento team to help identify students in need if a student and family do not reach out for help? So kind of the same idea there, right? During the registration process, if a family doesn't specifically identify that they're experiencing homelessness or might need assistance from the McKinney-Vento team, what's the best way to go about doing that? And we certainly welcome other thoughts on that in the Q&A section if programs have ways that they've maybe some interesting or unique ways that they found to try to identify students in need and approach families that might need to receive some services that maybe they didn't reach out to you about. And Lynn, I don't know if you've got any stories about that as well.
Yeah, I do. There are a few of our clients that we work with. The teachers are the first point of contact, right? So they oftentimes can notice when there's a change in that child. Maybe the child's coming in or staying longer at the day. They're coming in earlier, staying later, especially during the cold months. Oftentimes that child could come in and have the same clothes on a couple of times, or they don't have a coat. So that kind of alerts them. So what they typically have done is they'll talk to one of the liaisons who will just kind of keep a watch to see what's going on and ask for a parent conference so that they bring the parents in and offer them services as well. And that seems to be a good solution for many of their programs, at least to get them to open up, identify, or know that there are services that are available to them, and the school districts are happy to help.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Now, this next question that came in a little while ago from Emily, asking, are multiple people able to enter data in the system, or is there only one person that is put in charge of this? And Emily is asking this because at their school or district, they have the person working on the grant and other as the LEA.
Yeah, so with the HIMSS application, you can set up as many users as you want. As I think I mentioned before, each user has their own security level and access to a specific school or schools within your district. So you can sort of decide what each person is supposed to be doing in the system and what you want to grant them permission to do. So, well, folks do have any questions about sort of pricing, we don't price the software based on number of users. It's based on sort of the size of your district, number of schools that are in your district. And if you want some more information on that, we can sort of get you in touch with our sales team as well. We've got another slide here that has some contact information. But yeah, so when it comes to users, you can have as many users in as you need, and hopefully get some of that load off of your shoulders, or if you've got one data entry person, hopefully you can help spread that load. And like I mentioned, if you've got social workers, rather than them documenting things on paper and then turning that over to somebody else to enter into a data collection system, you could give them access to do that directly themselves.
Perfect. Thanks for that. So this other question that came in was wondering how other districts are using this software. I mean, is there, for example, a limited number of people who are given access?
Yeah, so the common scenario, and Lynn, if you've got other thoughts on this as well, feel free to jump in at any point and stop me from rambling. But there's typically a district liaison, a Mckinney-Vento liaison, who kind of oversees the software and is set up as an administrator in the application. And then they'll add additional users so that if they have folks that are interacting with students on a daily basis, they can log in and enter case notes, track services that are being provided, things like that related to the child and their family, document communication that they've had with the family, things like that. And then we do have additionally state level implementations where the sort of head of Mckinney-Vento programming for the state kind of oversees, and then individual district liaisons have access, and kind of spreads out after that to individual site level staff or school level staff and social workers.
So if I could just jump in there for just a second, please. Typically what will happen is that a liaison or a staff member that works directly at a school or a teacher that's identifying, they only have the ability that they can say that they've identified that Lynn Russo may need services. Not that she's getting them, just that she may. So then what can happen is that somebody that's a little higher, maybe a social worker or a liaison that has access to one or many of the schools, only works with the individuals that are associated to the programs they're associated to. Then again, there are areas, if in the program, if you're providing a service such as before and after school, or you're providing gifted or talented programs or parent programs, you can associate, or they can associate staff members that only see students that are participating in a program. They do not have any idea that those individuals are experiencing homelessness, that they're just receiving or participating in programs. So that's another way to provide additional services, no additional cost, and provide a safe haven for the families as well. So hope that helps.
Perfect. And kind of to follow up on what you were saying before, Joe, you might have covered it, but just in case, in regards to people who are given access to it, do you see that it's usually people in the central office staff member who have access to this?
Yeah, so it definitely varies. There's usually somebody at sort of the central office level who is overseeing as an administrator in the software, but a lot of the sort of day-to-day entry is being done by school level staff or social workers.
Awesome. Perfect. This next person, oh, that jumped away from me for a second. Can you share, what process and forms to districts use to start the assistance process for the moment the family reaches out for help?
Yeah, I don't know that we have any specific processes or forms that that districts that we're working with are using. A lot of that is done sort of outside of the software, where they're interacting with the parents and reaching out to them. But in terms of sort of feedback from those forums, they're able to enter that into the system. That might be if anybody out there has examples of forms that they're using or processes that they want to share in the chat or in the Q&A section, that could be very helpful as well.
Awesome. And I can see, for the person, someone in the chat, they wanted to see if they could look at the environment. And I know that Transact, can suggest a demo with the sales team for this person. So I think the information is right there. Perfect. Next question that came in.
Sorry,
Oh.
on that one, Stephen, on the environment,
Yeah, sorry.
sorry. When we send out the recording link, we can send a short, there's a short little video that shows the environment kind of in 2 minutes. Also, the information on the screen here now too, if you want to see more, Philip from our team would be happy to learn more, have a conversation with you, and then do a demo over the web as well to show you the environment a little bit more and get into the weeds a bit more on what the tool can provide. So definitely we'd be very happy to do that with you.
Awesome. Perfect. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Next question. Are these reports, can they be generated in Excel?
Yes. I'd say 98% of the reports, somewhere in there, are sort of table formatted. So yes, they can be, we've got export options of HTML, PDF, CSV, which can then be opened in Excel or Google Sheets or whatever spreadsheet tool you prefer.
Perfect. And this next question is pretty intense, but do you have any tips, if a family is refusing assistance? Have you experienced that at all? Len, you might have an example of that.
I have heard that the families are embarrassed to identify that they are homeless. I have heard of that, and in those instances, the teachers are taking it above and beyond. They're just taking their personal time, working a little bit closer with them, making sure that they have a safe haven, that they can stay at school, getting additional academic enrichment. But as far as anything structured, because they're undocumented, I wouldn't have that information, but I know that it's a large topic that they talk to me a lot about, on tips and how to track that, and do they have to be identified as homeless? And the answer is no. I mean, we can work with them on an additional status if they needed to. So do they want it? It depends on the school district and the internal federal requirements for that area, but we certainly would work with anybody on giving some thoughts.
Yeah, so a lot of the information about services being provided and things like that can still be tracked, even if the student is not technically identified as experiencing homelessness, if the district is still providing some sort of services to those children, maybe as just part of their typical after-school program or something like that, and want to keep track of some information about that child, so that if later in the year the parent does come back and say, okay, I'm identifying that I'm experiencing homelessness and my child is, then you've got some of that historical information already documented as well.
Another thing that comes to mind, if I can just jump right back in, please, is students that have aged out of homeless or foster care are a big population that have not graduated from school yet. So we do have ways that they can receive services and be identified not as homeless, but as other, so that they continue to stay to school and graduate and continue on.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for that. This is a really important question, so I'm glad you were able to provide some information for our listeners. So this next question that came in, this is kind of bouncing off of an earlier question about forms. But can users using the system upload or edit forms so that local and/or state forms can be propagated within the system?
Yeah, so there's document upload options both at, I guess, at the site level. So at the school level, so if there's sort of generic documents that are going to be used by staff members at that school, or that school need access to, they can upload those. But then also, like if you have scan documents for a child, those can be uploaded as well. So I think we may have mentioned things like birth certificates, immunization records, intake forms. If you have scanned copies of those, you can attach those to the child's record, so that you don't have to go digging through a file cabinet somewhere to find that information on somebody who, whatever, you got the information from 8 months ago. You just have that available in the system.
Another option that's available, if I could also jump in here, is if the school district or the county or whomever we're working with, if they have those documents on in a shared environment, they can upload a link right into the database and they can access those blank forms that way and get the information. And that can become available to whatever security level is needed. And that is becoming very popular as well.
Yeah. So something like a OneDrive or SharePoint
Right.
that you might have that you just want to give users access to through the system. Like Lynn said, you can have a link in there to get there.
Perfect. Thank you. This next question, does this integrate with parent notices?
Yeah, so parent notices is another piece of software that is offered by Transact. And at this point, there's no direct connection between HIMSS and parent notices. It is something that we've had some conversations about internally, trying to find ways to integrate those a little bit more efficiently. But at this point, they're sort of standalone applications, both offered through the Transact family of products.
Awesome. Another question, is there any way that the software is capable to receive information so that families and school staff can enter the information directly into the software?
So for school staff, yes. Due to the sensitivity of information being stored in the system, we do require users to have logins and passwords to interact with it. So we do restrict sort of who has access to information and to enter information. So you could have individual school level staff that are set up with user accounts to the application, and then they would be able to enter information on behalf of parents that they might have met with. But we don't have a way currently for parents to directly enter information or modify information associated with their child's record.
Thank you very much. And I'd just like to say we still have time for extra questions, about 6 minutes or so. So please feel free to continue submitting your questions. Next question that came in, do you think it would be possible to share, top 3 reports that districts have shared they really need and that the software offers.
Lynn, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah. So typically what they're looking for is the student's homeless report that will provide them the ability to see how many times a child has moved from one school to another one is a big one. Because what that will do is it provides them the ability to watch out for this big churn that's going on. The other one is based off of testing grades. That's a huge one. They're looking for the ability to identify students identified as homeless and watch the trends in their grades and their tests, because theoretically they are smaller, right? Their testing grades are a little lower than if they have a stable environment. Then for the programs that are working and providing those additional services, maybe a tutoring class or something such as that, a before and after school tutoring class, they're looking to see what the benefit of those are as well. So academic driven, other than the homeless students identifying how many times they've moved in a year, seems to be the biggest trend. And families, right? You know, some of the programs we work with, they go above and they also provide family parent GED classes. So they're trying to do what they can to end the homelessness, and they are paying for that out of maybe partner funding or something as that. So they're becoming much more in tune with trying to end the homeless situation. Hope that helps.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Thank you. Um, let's see, another question. Probably have time for one more question or two. When the question just jumped away from me. There we go. Can the software help track the engagement activities the parent is involved in, or the number of interactions the parent has had with the school? That's a good question.
Yeah, so both youth participants, so students within the school district and their family members, and by family members we mean adult family members as well as younger siblings. So if you've got whatever preschool or younger siblings that aren't actually enrolled in the school district yet, and you want to track services being provided to them or um, to the parents or adult family members of a participant, they can be added into the system as well. You can create sort of family entities, we call them households, within the application that connect those adult family members and younger siblings with students in the school district. And then you can track services that are being provided both to the child and their family members and generate reports to sort of see aggregated information on total number of participants served in different types of programming that you're offered.
Perfect. And we have time for one more question that just came in here. Is the program recommended more for a large school district with a higher number of homeless as opposed to, a smaller district with less homeless?
Yeah, I don't know that there's really a recommendation one way or the other. It's used by both large districts and smaller districts, and we've seen that um, in both cases there's been a lot of success with it. I think in smaller districts there's usually a smaller homeless student population, but there's also fewer staff that are involved in the program then. So having a tool that makes it easy to collect the information and generate reports is great. And then on the flip side, having a larger school district, you've got a larger population, more data that you need to keep track of, more students, and more people. So it can really be helpful in large school districts as well, because rather than having whatever 10 social workers, each with their own spreadsheet of data on their own computer somewhere, or even if it's on a shared drive, that can be difficult to manage. So having one central location for all that information can be really helpful.
Perfect. So that's all the time we have for our live Q&A. But if there were any questions that we didn't get to today, then our partners over at Transact will be willing to get back to your questions individually after today's webinar. And actually, as I go through my closing slides in just a few moments, please feel free, just continue submitting your questions if any come to mind, and we'll get to them after the show. And also, again, there's you're free to email additional questions to Philip Smith over at Transact. His email is there on the screen, philip@transact.com. But first off, thank you again, Joe, Ben, and Lynn for your time here today. And of course, thank you to Transact. And to your audience, I would also like to thank you for joining us here today. For those of you who particularly enjoyed what you saw here, there are many more upcoming web seminars like this one that are provided by us at District Administration, which is the leader in editorial coverage of news, trends, as well as current issues in K through 12. We have a wide range of readers here at DA who subscribe for free with us, and they stay up to date with us through our magazine, online, and through our newsletters and web seminars like this one. Also, if you would like to watch this web seminar again, and I know there were quite a few comments that were coming in throughout asking if that was the case, you'll be pleased to know that our team at DA will be sending everyone who attended as well as who registered an email at some point tomorrow. In that email, it will include the on-demand recording of the web seminar, as well as a link to the slides. So with that, on behalf of DA, this is Stephen Blackburn. Thanks everyone for coming here today. Take care, be well, and stay safe, everyone. Thanks again.
Thank you, everybody.